Hey, everyone, thanks for joining us on our Home Service Summit webinars series. If you've been on these before, you know we only talk about home services, we only talk about franchising, and I always have the pleasure of having on some of the coolest, hippest, and smartest, and good-looking people of franchising. Aaron's definitely in that category, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know Aaron over the years as he's been in franchising. Full disclosure, Aaron and I have gone backcountry together now, snowboarding this winter. We've done we've had some great times together and great conversations, and on ski lifts and stuff. That it's time to get him on here, and I'm sure my son, Aaron through his, Aaron does a great job of just getting online and telling the world about franchising, and so I thought we could talk to him today about some of that. So let me just do a quick intro on Aaron and on what we're going to do here. This is live, so if you're watching this live, there is a chat feature. In fact, I'm going to go to it right now, so just bear with me. And if at any point in time you want to ask any questions, feel free to load them into the chat. I may integrate them into our conversations as we're going along, or I may wait till the end of the interview. But I'll make sure that we do answer them. And so feel free to ask me or Aaron any questions you have on home service franchising, and we will do our darndest to make sure it gets answered. If you haven't met me yet, I'm the CEO of 5 Star Franchising, one of the founders of 5 Star Painting, and we have a company called Pronexus as well that supplies the home services industry with customer experience solutions around voice, text, chat, online scheduling. In fact, Rolling Sus is a customer of Pronexus, so thank you for entrusting us with your franchisee's business and your customers. Let me give you some background on Aaron. Aaron Harper's journey came from the competitive world of film and television and led him to franchising, driven by the passion for empowering others and simplifying the path to business ownership. After a successful period at Patch Boys, where he opened over 400 territories in a few years, which is just insane, Aaron decided to build something similar on his own, venturing out to transform Rolling Suds, a successful family-owned power washing business, into a franchise. And you've probably heard this term that's kind of floating around. He's all over responsible franchising. He just had an interview with Maddie Zook where Maddie did a takedown on him on this, which we'll talk about later, I think. But great conversation around how important it is to make sure that we're being responsible in how we franchise. And I think it's probably worth us talking about it. Aaron, let's kind of step back if you don't mind. Let's go to your. I know you joined the industry in sales, and you joined at Patch Boys. Tell us why did you want to get into franchising, and when did some of the big takeaways you had while working with Belfour at Patch Boys and selling for them?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me on. I love our conversation. I'm glad we get to do it in public because we've had such good conversations in the past. And so I started with ChemDry was the first brand that I worked at. And then that was bought by Belfour. And then Belfour acquired Patch Boys. And so that was kind of my path. Prior to that, I didn't know anything about franchising. I, like many outside the franchise industry, thought that franchising was just McDonald's. And a buddy of mine was like, you should get into franchise development. And I was like, what's that? And so loved the idea of being able to help people become business owners and kind of give them a path to entrepreneurship and business ownership that they might not otherwise have or be willing to take without franchise opportunity. Over the years, as I grew these different franchise systems, I basically was like, I was a little bit disillusioned with some of the stuff I had seen. Whether it was, an acquisition gone wrong, or whether it was we're cutting support, or whether it was we're on the tail end of a private equity turn and we have to sell units. And this stuff concerned me. And a couple of times I almost left the franchise industry because of it. Mm-hmm. And we had with Patch Boys, when we acquired that business, when Belfour acquired that business, the founder exited. You and I both know, because I think you looked at that business as well. Yeah. It needed a lot of help. I was the first full-time employee on brand that had 100 locations and 40 franchisees. Some were open, most weren't. And we had to hire a brand president, and they wanted me to sell a ton of units. And I was like, we got to fix it. We got to put systems in place. So we did that. We hired a brand president, and him and I had never put my operations hat on other than seeing what I thought operations should have been with the previous brand. And so we went out on a listening tour and did what I think franchisors need to all be comfortable and willing to do, is listen. And we said, what do you need from us? What did you think you were going to get that you didn't get? Where's your business today? Where do you want it to be 5 years from now? What can we do to help you get there? And then we built systems around everything they needed. And from October of 2022, when we launched our first franchisee, he was profitable his first month based on the systems we put in place. I felt we were prepared to grow that company. And so from October of 2020 to 22, so 24 months, I added 223 locations to that business. And prior to that, with ChemDry, I had added 200 locations to that business in 3 years. So I had a ton of experience. All of those franchisees for Patch Boys, they opened. They opened in the time we said they were going to open, and they opened with jobs on the calendar and a full-time skilled labor hired to training. So that's when I started getting involved more in the franchise industry, just speaking on panels and leading discussions. Have been given the opportunity to speak and do as keynote for the IFA, for the Emerging Franchisor Conference. And so they came to me and they were like, hey, we love what you did, with these brands. We want to promote you and have you take on a business that's not a franchise yet. We want you to franchise it. You can start from scratch. There won't be any kind of culture that you'll have to change. You can build it from the beginning, and we'll double your salary and give you a really fancy title. And I was like, I can do this on my own. I can build a team. I can raise capital. I can find a business I believe in. Could make that business become the biggest brand in the world in whichever industry I decide. So went out and searched for a business to franchise, and met the founders of Rolling Suds after analyzing 24 of them, different businesses, and loved the founders. Knew I could partner with them. Acquired the franchise rights, raised capital, and built a franchise system around 34-year-old pressure washing business. We have now 28 employees, and I have sold 187 locations to 51 franchisees in 26 states in 15 months.
It's incredible.
And that catches you up to speed.
Yeah, that's like whirlwind tour. I want to kind of go back for a second and talk about a few of those things, because I think there's some value in this. First of all, ChemDry, it's a unique concept. Would you mind just like for our listeners breaking down the ChemDry model? Because it's not a standard home service model. Like what do people pay to get in? Was a royalty, which is kind of they have a royalty, but it's an odds type royalty, right?
Yep.
How does the franchisor make money? I mean, unpack that for us a little bit, because I think it'd be beneficial.
Yeah, no. And again, keep in mind, like when I came into this, I thought McDonald's was franchising. So I did not know how the actual business model of franchising works. So ChemDry operates effectively as a distributorship for chemicals.
Right.
So they create the proprietary chemical that you use to clean carpets, and it's green and all that kind of stuff. But then they've sold, I think it was over 3,000 locations across in 52 countries when I got involved. And then they pay a flat royalty to the franchisor. So the franchisor makes money on the flat royalty, but really they're making money on chemical sales.
Isn't that $500 a month per territory?
It's between $400 to $500 a month. Yeah. I forget what I think at one point it was $442. I don't know what it is now.
Yeah.
But the thing that was interesting to me about that concept was we could put multiple franchisees in a city, and there weren't borders. And so that was always a challenge for me, because I was like, wait a minute, they competing against each other, and and then there was well, no, there's different marketing companies that generate leads, and we can put them on different, and so that was a challenge. Franchisees were very much owner operator in the sense that like they were doing the cleaning, and they wanted them doing the cleaning for an extended period of time, which I understand. But like a lot of people would leave a job where they were making 50 grand a year and they'd buy another job, and like they just weren't really business owners.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a path for them really to get out of that unless they got themselves out of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then in COVID, they cut a lot of the resources. And anyways, the franchisees there was a lot to be desired, in the experience that they had.
Yeah, I'd love to spend some time on this because once again, for anyone who's in home services, there are different ways of approaching home service franchising. And I'm not here to tell you whether ChemDry has done it right or wrong. For me, it's just interesting that you've got a model that charges a flat rate royalty of $400 to $500 a month. It's not a lot of money when you think about it. I mean, we've got franchisees that do $1 million, $2 million, $3 million a year that pay 5%. So this is, they're much smaller commitments monthly. So it's easier to say yes to. The franchise fee, I think, is like $12,500 or something.
At the time, it was $19,500 when I got involved.
So I think they bumped it up a little bit. I know
they bumped it up to like $22,500, but I mean, yeah, like 6, 7. I mean, it was like $12,500 at one point. There was a Home Depot involvement at some point.
That's right. So I'm used to charging $55,000 to $60,000 for a territory that's protected. ChemDry is charging $20,000 for unprotected territory, and it's kind of like a very Darwinistic survival of the fittest model, where like the best survive and thrive.
Right.
Which is also interesting, and you mentioned 3,000. At one point, they had over 4,000 franchisees worldwide, which is massive. That's a massive system, right? They grew so fast, so big. ChemDry also was privately backed. Home Depot did open them for a little while, own them for a while. They kind of traded hands a few times. They've been around for a long time. They're actually based in Logan, Utah, just north of us, here in Springville, which is why I know so much about them, because they're a Utah native franchisor. But I just find it super interesting that their model really made the money on the solution, with the actual chemicals that were used to clean the carpet. They built the model to create a royalty effectively off of the product, and then have a very minimal royalty that's monthly. And so that, just as you're building your model, there are some brands I think can lean towards that kind of approach. And their average job size is like $400, $450, right?
Yep.
Which is interesting because I want to go now from here to Patch Boys and some of the takeaways you had from Patch Boys. And there's two things that strike me as you were talking about it. One, you mentioned listening tour. I absolutely love that. Who went on that listening tour? How many franchisees did you see? And what were your biggest takeaways?
So 40. There were 40 franchisees.
Yep.
And we talked to all of them.
You went to all 40.
We either went to them or we had a virtual discussion with them. It was COVID. It was 2020. It was June of 2020 when we acquired it. So there wasn't as much travel as I would have liked, but there was still, it was, the whole purpose of it was tell us what's going on so that we can figure out how to build this that can best serve you.
Yeah.
And that's the approach that we took. And part of that was also just to gain their trust. They didn't know us from Adam, and they bought into this franchise, and they thought they were going to get a certain level of support. And ultimately what they learned is the franchisor didn't have any experience in franchising and didn't know how to properly support them in the way that they were expecting. And
so is this something that you and the brand president went into this listening tour? Was anyone else involved? Did you have coaches or marketing people involved in it?
Me and the brand president were the only full-time employees. I was the first full-time employee. Then it was the brand president was the second full-time employee. And so
when Buffalo bought Patch Boys, they didn't take anyone with them?
There were no employees.
Zero. That's
Zero.
Incredible. Like that is crazy. I know. I don't, in saying this, I don't want to ever say something negative about another organization. So everyone does things the way they want to do them. That'd be mind blowing to me. But so you can almost say you're doing a startup. You bought a startup.
We bought a startup, but we didn't grow it from scratch. we grew it from
Yeah.
negative scratch because we had to do a culture shift.
We grew it from negative scratch. We were in the red. Oh man. Well, but just a few things. So listening to what I love, I think this is a great takeaway. I'm a huge advocate of spending time with franchisees at every level of the organization. It can be so easy for us to just kind of insulate ourselves from the owners, but I'm a huge fan of spending time and listening to the people that we're serving. So I love that you did that. You mentioned you sold, I think it was 200 locations, or
223 in 24 months,
Yeah.
83
That's right.
franchisees.
223 locations in a very short period of time. Unpack that for us. What did you do? Like, how do you take a business that was negative scratch, okay, and get to a place where you can now add in that short time frame 223 locations? What would you say, like, if you gave me the top 3 things you did, aside from, like, let's just put aside, let's presume the model works, franchisees are happy, franchisees are validating. Let's presume that's all the foundation that you've kind of done through the efforts you've made operationally. Specifically, what did you do to do it? Because a lot of brands are out there, have great brands, right, Aaron? Like, there are companies out here that in home service franchising have an amazing model, highly profitable. Franchisees are very, very satisfied, and yet they won't add more than 15 units a year,
Right.
despite having guys making $600,000-700,000 per a year off their business. So,
Right.
what did you do differently? Because I'm guessing that Patch Boys didn't have a lot of owners doing $1 million a year when you were doing this.
No.
What did you do specifically in that period of time to unlock that value and get in a position where you're actually adding some of your locations?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 pieces to it. One, which is the piece you're talking about, which you have to have a model where franchisees are satisfied and they're opening and they're being successful and they're validating well. The other side is you have to be able to know how to identify, select, and ultimately award franchise locations. Up until that point, I had only done organic lead flow. I had only done organic deals, which for those listening, organic would be pay-per-click, Facebook, portals, kind of paying for leads and more or less dialing for dollars. We were doing with ChemDry 250 leads a month sometimes, and I was doing everything from first call to completion and close. When I got involved with Patch Boys, I had never worked with brokers before, and there was one remaining broker in the industry that would still work with the brand at the time.
Who was that?
But it was at FranServe. It was one consultant at FranServe. So I had realized that not only were the franchisees upset, so were the franchise consultants and the brokers out there. And so for those who are brand new to home service franchising, a broker is effectively a real estate agent for brands. They present brands that make sense to their candidates, and then the candidates choose a brand, and then the broker gets paid a commission on the back end out of the franchise fee. So I basically did the same thing with all of the brokers that had interacted with the brand that I did with franchisees, which was go on a listening tour and call them until they either told me what was wrong and we could change that, and I did that in a defensive way because there was a competitor that had captured some of that kind of market share as the founder exited. And so I did that, and that ended up being an offensive mechanism because these franchise consultants knew that I wasn't the same and could provide value, and was able to tell them what type of value we were providing in a way that they could translate to their candidates that was meaningful enough to receive a ton of prospective candidates from those efforts. And those relationships that I've had with some of what I believe to be the most ethical, responsible, and incredible franchise consultants in the industry have propelled Rolling Slits to where it's at as well, because we were able to kind of pick up where we left off with those same franchise consultants.
This is a relation to business. You clearly know that area more than anyone. And I would, if you don't mind, you mentioned a listening to brokers or franchise consultants. I love that as well. What would you say are the three most important things every single the really great franchise consultants want? What do they tell you?
They want their people that the ones that I work with want the
Yeah.
people that they present to brands. They want to be able to call them a year from now and then be happy about the investment that they made and be willing to recommend that their friends and family go buy, if they're going to buy a franchise, work with that same franchise consultant. Um, and those are the types of franchise consultants I want to work with. That's the most important thing to them. The second most important thing is that you can actually close the deal. If you have a great model, but you can't actually bring the prospective franchisee across the finish line, then it just doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter how good the model is. And then the third thing that's really appealing to franchise consultants is the speed in which you do it. We've seen the franchise development. You've probably seen this over the years. It's evolved, and I think the best brands have evolved with the franchise development process. I think a lot of the brands that still struggle is it's still stuck in the 20 years ago franchise development process. I pride myself on being very nimble, and I teach my team to be very nimble in the franchise sales process, which I know we've had many discussions about this. There are things that you do in every single franchise sales. You always review an FTD. You always have the disclosure period. You always have validation that happens. But the way I do it, franchisees don't feel like they're being jammed into a process that everyone else gets. Mm-hmm. And so what that allows us to do is be nimble and serve the prospective franchisees and give them the information in the times that they need it. Versus we're gonna wait till call number 7 to answer your questions on marketing. Mm-hmm. And I think that ability to be nimble has allowed us to cut out a lot of the fluff in the franchise development process. And then we're also just big on like rampant transparency. Like, instead of like, this isn't going to be that hard, like, we'll do all the marketing for you, and like, you can just like wake up and check your bank account, once a month. Like, we're like, no, this is going to be really hard, and you're still starting a business from scratch, and it's still a startup, and we're going to help you, and here's how we help you, but here are also what your obligations are. And if you do what we say you should do, and we do what we're saying we're going to do, like, we're going to have a great partnership for the next 10 to 20 years. And I think that at least what I've seen is that has been a refreshing take for a lot of the prospective franchisees who are evaluating Rolling Suds, but also evaluating other brands, is like, gosh, I got all my questions answered in this one call, that it's taken me 6 calls to get these questions answered with another brand. And I think that allowed us to get more deals across the line, and is also very interesting to the broker community at large, because time kills deals, as we all know.
Yeah, you kind of move at the pace of the people you're working with. You mentioned that speed to close. What is the average speed to close for a Rolling Suds?
Probably about 4 to 5 weeks, if not. And it depends on the candidate. I mean, we've got deals that have been done in 16 days. We've got deals that have been done in 6 to 8 months. So it just varies, but I try to teach my team. So just to be clear to the listeners, I single-handedly walked all 187 locations across the finish line myself. All 51 franchisees. I did the franchise development myself up until about a month ago. So that also allowed us to cut out a lot of the fluff too, because if someone wasn't right, I mean, we've turned away 59 people that wanted to become franchisees, had the capital, and weren't right for our system. Which, for any new emerging home service franchisors, if you're going to leave with a takeaway from me, it is 100% turn away more franchisees than you bring in, because a bad franchisee or bad group of franchisees can absolutely tank your system. And it's honestly not even worth it. I'd rather you just start with 1 or 2 and get them profitable, and then go to the next ones, because culture, especially on the franchisee level, is everything within a system. So anyways, yeah, I've done the franchise development myself. So that allows us to also be more kind of speedy. And and because it's just it's a gut thing for me in a lot of senses. And we've realized now that we have a franchise sales team, JT is overseeing the franchise sales team, JT Peterson, is that what I was doing wasn't necessarily scalable, because Aaron's gut isn't scalable. So we're currently building scalable systems to be able to accomplish that.
Well, that's awesome that you speed to close at 4 to 5 weeks is impressive. You mentioned earlier that you sold 51 franchisees, 187 territories. That means they're buying 3 or more. It means there's a lot of multi-packs that are happening in general. I think when we were talking, you said if someone comes in, they have to buy at least 3 territories. Is that part of it? Okay, go ahead.
No. So the minimum that they buy is 2. The maximum that they can buy to start is 3, unless they have prior business experience and or have scaled someone else's business or a business unit within someone's business. So they have to have some type of experience scaling businesses to qualify for more. And we did this with Patch Boys. The max was 3 that you could buy with Patch Boys. And that's how I went into this with that same mentality. I had to adapt, because what happened is we started attracting operators that I have never seen before in any of the brands that I've been involved in. So we signed up, I'll give you an example. We signed up the largest Fast Signs franchisee. He does $42 million a year.
Wow.
So he bought 6 territories because he knows how to scale a $42 million enterprise. We brought in someone else who exited. He raised $20 million, built a SaaS company, and in 4 years exited for $135 million. So he bought 5 territories, right? So what I try to do is tailor the approach to unit count that people buy to what they're actually going to be able to develop. Yeah. The reason why I don't do single unit deals is because the buyer profile for Rolling Suds is not the single unit buyer. I've learned over the years that the guy who buys 1 unit or the gal who buys 1 unit requires more help. They're less successful. And this is a gross generalization, by the way. So this might not be the case for every model. They fail more regularly. They need more help, and they produce less royalties. And we are only looking for kind of the empire builder, people who can build massive businesses. And the 59 people that I've turned away, I just didn't feel like we're going to be able to accomplish that. And so that, I hope that gives a little bit more clarity.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Finding people, as you say, that are empire builders, right, is not easy. Finding candidates who sold a company for $120 million, not easy. Clearly, that FranServe, I think FranServe is still the organization you work with the closest.
FranServe is, and then a lot of them are now finding me via the content that I put out.
Yeah. Would you say then that when you built Rolling Suds, you built it to be an absentee model, or are these people actually actively engaged running the business themselves? Like an empire builder brings to my mind someone that's hiring people and they're running the business, and they're working on the business, not running the business themselves individually. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, so I think, and just to be clear to anyone who's watching, I think the word absentee should be struck from the vernacular of franchising. I think it's deceptive. And I think it doesn't mean what it actually means to run a business. I think what actually people want when they buy an absentee business is they want cash flow without work. And if that's the case, buy a real estate property or buy vending machines. But a franchise, particularly in the home service space, at least initially, cannot be absentee unless you have an operating partner or someone who has a salary or ownership basis that is meaningful enough to make that their everything, because someone has to make that business their everything. Someone, and they have to be in it enough and long enough to make it, because it's too risky for me as a franchisor to bring in someone who wants to just try out my opportunity and work 10 to 15 hours a week and see if it works. Because
Yeah,
like my minimums are not for the guy or the gal who's just going to like see if it works. Like my minimums or my franchise opportunity is built for a full-time involvement opportunity. With that said, the gentleman who has a $42 million business has an operating partner who has upside in the form of phantom stock of the ownership up to 33% of the company. So that person I'm training to be the franchisee. And that person has now ownership that is meaningful enough for them to never want to do anything else. I think where people get into trouble is they say, it can be run semi-absentee or absentee. There's no clear and uniform definition of what those words mean within the franchise industry, why I also think they're deceptive. And with a home service brand particularly, you got to be a hunter. We're going out, we're knocking doors, we're kicking doors down. Like, it's not like you build a McDonald's, you hire a manager and people walk in. Like, you got to be a hunter in the home service space. And so you need someone who is motivated enough by the incentives that are built in to actually be that hunter or manage the hunters or whatever it is. Now, with that said, our model requires that franchisees hire 2 people prior to going to training. They cannot go to training without having 2 employees hired. One is a general manager in training that is actually the lead technician and runs that truck, with the plan to then promote that person within the first 6 months to a larger management role. And then there is a junior technician that works underneath that general manager in training. So they cannot go to training without those 2 people hired.
Who does the sales? If a GM is running the truck with a junior tech that can offer
The owner.
the business of tire washing, you have the owner actually doing the sales himself?
Correct.
You guys do a lot of commercial work, right? I think a lot of your business is commercial.
The majority is.
Yeah. So it's B2B. Your business is mainly B2B. So is the owner like dialing for dollars? Is he out knocking on doors? How do you guys find your business?
So we have an outbound lead generation structure within our model. So we are reaching out to property managers and facilities managers and maintenance companies on behalf of the franchisees, and we are generating warm, qualified leads that the franchisees then pay for, and we turn on that engine about a month behind going to training. So the expectation is that the franchisees from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day for 40 hours a week leading up to training are out doing business development, responding to leads, and also doing their own kind of relationship marketing is what we call it, kind of referral partners and establishing relationships in their marketplace 40 hours a week for 4 weeks prior to going to training, with the goal of selling, at least a full calendar month, week 1, and ideally more than that. We stole that, by the way, from Orange Theory Fitness. They wouldn't let someone open without selling a full month of memberships prior to launch. Now, we're not that strict, but the expectation is this is a full-time, you're out developing relationships in your community piece, or someone on your team that is going to stay around long enough and that is incentivized properly is doing that themselves.
I love that. I think that keeping that sales culture, and also getting to the place where before they come to training, they've learned enough. Is there like a pre-training training? Like, you're giving them some tools, obviously, on how to sell. They're not going to go door to door without having some training. What does that look like?
We teach them everything that they need to know about how to run the business before they go to training. So like, we have a whole launch program where they have exams they're taking each week. There's videos they're watching. There's we teach them how to estimate. We teach them everything. So that whole 4 weeks of training of pre-launch work, they already know how to estimate. They already know how to talk to customers. They already know how to sell. And so when they get to training, the only thing that we can't teach them over the computer or via videos is how to run and operationalize the truck. And our trucks are super, they're 16-foot box trucks. There's custom equipment. We can power wash 5 stories from the ground. We can do a 3,000 square foot house in 20 to 25 minutes. So that is what we spend the majority of our time on, in-person training, so that we can make sure that the jobs that they've sold can be profitable based on the operations of how that truck operates.
I think that's some great takeaways here for those of you in home services, especially B2B. This idea of having training before the training, and that training is all about how to fill the funnel effectively, how to really present Rolling Suds to the community they're selling to, and then the training in person is actually how you functionally do the work. And that's where you've got your GM, your junior checker coming to get that training. I love that. When you think about how do you create the most value at Rolling Suds, clearly there's franchise development is one of the ways, one of the levers you pull to create value, right? The brand getting big enough, being the largest brand in power washing in North America. I think you can probably safely say that that's the case now.
We are. Yeah.
So you're number one in the category of power washing, which is, a few years ago and it was an idea, which I want to come back to that in a minute. But, adding franchisees, that's awesome. For the franchisee themselves, though, how do you think you as a franchisor can add the most value to the franchisee? I know you've talked about sales training. You've talked about how to do the function of the work. What other things are you thinking about, is your team thinking about, that can add the most value to your franchisees?
So what's wild is, I raised a significant amount of capital so that I could put the team in place before I needed the team. I knew how quickly we were going to be profitable based upon how I know that we award franchise territories. But because I was doing franchise development and because we were able to pick up so much traction so quickly, I was forced to hire really, really well for the other functions of the business. So I have a leadership team. There's 4 people and an executive assistant that report directly to me. And then everyone else reports to them. And so to be 16 months into this and have 28 employees, that means we've hired a new person every 14 days, basically, which I believe is what it takes in order to do things, the right way. Have we made mistakes? Absolutely. But are we building the team before we need the team? Yes, that's the goal. And I've learned that over the years from other brands that I've been either directly or indirectly involved in, is it's more of a reactionary. What I've seen is more of a reactionary, we need a business coach now, let's go get one. Whereas I'm like, we're going to need a business coach in 6 months. Let's get one now. Let's get them trained up. Let's get them to start working with a smaller group of franchisees so that when we need them in 3 to 6 months, they're ready to go. And so really foreseeing what the issues are going to be before we hit them is something that I pride myself on being able to do. And now that I'm not the one awarding the franchise territories and doing the franchise development myself, I can see, like, I'm not in the business. I'm on the business all day long, trying to figure out what needs to happen. And that's an inflection point that the business reached once we got to, realistically, probably 35 to 40 franchisees. So obviously we have
think about the ratio, Aaron. Just think about the ratio you have right now. You've got 20 employees to 51 owners. It's like, there's, for every 2 franchisees, there's an employee at corporate, which is actually, if you imagine all the vendors you have working for you, the amount of people pulling for the franchisees' success is pretty impressive already, right? That's pretty impressive. Do you mind if I ask, Aaron,
Sure.
do you use any kind of like management operating system like EOS or anything else like that?
We do. Yeah, we operate on EOS.
Okay, great. So
I read Traction 5 times before we launched, and then I self-implemented at the beginning.
Awesome, great. So some of these questions I'm going to ask you probably already know all about, which makes it helpful. But before we come to my other question, I missed a question that we had here from the audience. Johnny has a question about the flat fee model. He says, with a flat fee royalty model, I'm curious if you periodically evaluate your actual royalty revenue compared to the traditional percentage of revenue royalty fees. I think that question probably came back to the ChemDry discussion, how they had a flat rate. I don't believe Rolling Suds has a flat rate.
No.
What is your
We're 8% for our royalty. And that's the flat fee model only worked in that model because they're making money on chemical sales.
Right.
So
Do you
whether
know?
they,
Do you
yeah,
know what effectively they're making though, Aaron? Like, do you know if it's like 2 or 3% of sales?
no
Any idea?
clue.
Okay.
No, so I wasn't on the back end of that business in terms of like the operations side. I would sell the franchises, and then I had expectations that they would be supported in the way that I presented it, and we so I kind of like saw what I would have hoped was happening, so that I
Mhm.
knew what I wanted to implement in future businesses.
Yeah, and I just would maybe add on to that. It is pretty uncommon to have a flat-based royalty. I've seen a declining royalty where, based on people's sales increasing, they can have a declining royalty. I've seen stuff like that happen. It's not very often I see a ChemDry model, frankly. Uh, I don't recommend it. And I'll just share why. And Aaron hit on this. He has 28 employees. Is that right?
Yeah,
28 employees. He is resourcing an organization in a way that is very aggressive, that's building for a vision that's very large. If you don't fund the franchise correctly, then the vision for the brand and what it could accomplish is muted. It is ultimately reduced, right? So I would not recommend a very small royalty model where your support's like very minimal. You want to build a brand that can really support and enhance the success of owners. So I can come back to Johnny's question. I apologize for mishearing that. So how do you go about ensuring that you receive the correct amount of royalties? That is a great question, Johnny. Let's spend some time on that.
sure.
Aaron, how do you make sure that your franchisees are paying the 8% that they owe you?
Well, I think that's more of like a compliance question, but my thought is that each franchisor, before launching their franchise system, needs to be able to model out 5 to 7 years of what type of infrastructure is required in order to get locations open. And that's going to be different, and not just open, but open and cash flowing. And that's going to be a different number for each model, depending on how long it takes to open, depending on what kind of employees are required, depending on whether it's brick and mortar or not, depending on how long it takes to get trucks, or like there's just a bunch of factors. But the reason why franchising, one of the reasons why franchising is so hard, is franchisees need the most support from you when you have the least amount of royalties.
Right.
And so basically, if you don't have the support built in on the front end, it's going to be a lot harder to get them to a royalty level that actually makes sense to support the growth. And so where a lot of franchisors get into a trouble is they don't have the capital or the infrastructure to help franchisees get to that support level. And so anyone who's considering becoming a franchisor or franchising their business needs to raise money or have enough money from their existing locations to build that infrastructure on the front end that can get, depending on the number of units you sell and the number of franchisees you sell, that infrastructure is going to vary pretty greatly. And so without knowing what those numbers are and how much it costs to get one franchisee open and profitable, then I wouldn't recommend selling any units until you know that number, and then back into that number based upon the amount of capital that you have or the amount of capital that you need.
Maybe just to kind of come back at the question of like, how do you make sure that franchisees are actually reporting correctly, that they're paying the royalties that they do owe? I think there's I don't think 20 years of franchising experience, in my experience, would tell me there's a few ways you do that. One, if you're in a business that they're buying products like ChemDry, in my case, in painting, for example, people are buying paint from different suppliers. We have relationships with those suppliers that tell us what volume of paint they're buying. And then we can back in from what they're buying in product to what their sales should be that they're reporting. You also have bank statements you can verify. You've got compliance measures around auditing you could do. All those I don't like. I believe a franchisee should be paying what they owe because they believe they get value, and you are so focused on providing value that they will pay you the fee because they know that what they're paying you, you provide way more than what they give you in terms of royalties. And I think if you build it right, you should have a a POS system or a CRM system that's tracking all the customers that come in, all the leads that come in, and where they are on the funnel. And ultimately, you get a good idea that if they've got 50 calls a month and they've been buying X amount of product a month, then their sales are going to be somewhere around 50,000 or 60,000 that month, and their royalty should kind of correlate.
Right.
So those are kind of the best ways. A lot of brick and mortar concepts, they just rely on the POS system. But in home services, we have other methods like that. And I think if you've got a fully integrated system that tracks customers from the very beginning to the very end, it gives you that transparency. A great question, Johnny. Thanks for asking it. Let me come back to an EOS question. And Aaron, I know you do an L10 meeting every week.
Yep.
You've got your people present in that level 10 meeting.
Yep.
You guys are doing your updates. You're going through your scorecards, your rocks, your to-dos, and you're doing all that as part of that meeting, which I think is awesome. For the listeners, your scorecard, and for those of you who don't use EOS, it's effectively the most important numbers you're managing to every week that help you get a sense of where the business is heading. Many times it's a leading indicator. Sometimes it's a lagging indicator, but they're the most important numbers. For the benefit of our listeners, Aaron, what are the most important numbers you manage to at Rolling Sets?
Yeah. So franchisee lead generation, a lot of it is based upon franchisee performance, because I feel like franchisee performance is a leading indicator for franchisor performance. If franchisees are converting estimates, if franchisees are generating leads, if franchisees have good revenue, then we'll theoretically on the franchisor level have good royalties and good costs there. So pretty much everything, like we have 7 key metrics that we track for franchisees that drive the growth of their business. It's amount of estimates that are residential versus commercial. It's conversion rate on those estimates. It's revenue year to date, month to date. It is profitability. So we have, and this I guess goes into Johnny's question, like we have a bookkeeping company that does their books, and the bookkeeping company delivers their P&Ls to us every month. So we're able to see, I joke, I say, without us having the P&Ls, it'd be like going to a doctor and the doctor's asking for medical records. And you're like, I'm not going to give you the medical records, but I want your advice on what type of things I should do to take care of my health. And so we have that allows us to see kind of where the cash flow is coming in and out. And then, yeah, so those are the pieces on the franchisee level. On the franchisor level, the levers we can really pull are cost per franchisee acquisition, and how do we decrease the cost per franchisee acquisition? Because the more that we have left over from the franchise fees that we get, the more support we can provide to franchisees via infrastructure and hiring people. So with me stepping out of the franchise development process, other than a final approval call, I'm able to focus more on like top of the funnel lead gen that is organic. And so when you really dial in, like what is the actual lever that you can pull to decrease the cost per franchisee acquisition, it's, for me, the amount of content units we put out, the follower count per social media channel, and anything, and engagements, impressions, anything kind of there, because that directly results in more lead flow and higher quality lead flow as well, where people have been following me for months and they're like, I'm ready to go. I already know all about your background and kind of what you're doing over there.
Yeah.
So those are really kind of like my predominant focus right now, at least on the franchise development side, where I can add more value there potentially than I was actually being one of the sales guys, because I can be up here and say, all right, how big can we grow this thing? So we're going super hard on content, just in a general sense. So those are something, I mean, there's more, like obviously franchisor revenue, franchisor profit and stuff like that. But like, those are the things that really you can dial up or down.
Yeah, I love, Aaron, that you spent a lot of time in this conversation on the leading indicators. I can't stress this enough. You want to be looking at your weekly meetings at what's going to tell you the business will look like in a month or two from now. Because if you can make changes today, because you see something happening today that will happen 2 months from now, now you can make those moves. You can be way more nimble. And I can go back to my Fiserv Paying days where we knew what royalties looked like about 2 months away from it actually happening, because it all was about how many leads came into our system in that week that told us what that would look like 2 months later. And you know,
Right.
just like you said, conversion rates that obviously dial it in, average job size would dial it in to help us know that. And so we can make moves and make adjustments. We can tell franchisees that, you know, they're going to have a challenge that's coming up because we're seeing a big drop off in lead flow. And we looked at it very, very closely frequently. So I love you doing that. I have a question here from Fareen. Any plans on expanding Rolling Suds to Canada?
Yes, that's next where we're going next. So I
I'm
don't have.
Canadian, Fareen, so he better do it. I mean, Canada is like, it's an
Yeah,
amazing country, and I'm telling you, it's dirty up there. We got to go clean that
yeah,
place up. With
yeah,
with all the winters we've got and all the salt in the roads they put out there, power washing's a hit.
yeah. So that is the next direction we'll go. As to when, I don't know, but I swear someone reaches out to me at least every 3 to 4 weeks that says when you're in Canada, let me know. So I'll probably once we get like a Canadian FTD and figure out our supplier relationships up there and making sure it all happens well, I'll probably make an announcement on social and we'll just have a lot of interest. So
I love it. Yeah, you do. It's pent up demand coming your
yeah.
way. Michael has another question for us. He would like to know, how did you price out your franchise fee? That's a great question, actually. You mean you designed this business, Aaron, from scratch? I was with you at
From
the
scratch.
beginning when you were just ideating what you're going to do, picking the category. How did you decide what to charge for your franchise fee?
So I looked at every other company that is selling 100 plus units per year and that it was in a similar space and saw what theirs were. I read all of their FTDs so I could see what the competitive landscape was. And then I went lower for the first 12 months in order to give franchisees more upside. And I set the expectation with those first franchisees that this is a lower amount. But it's because you're one of the early adopters and we haven't proven this out in 17 different states yet. So we did for our first 12 months 39.9, which is slightly below industry standard, I would say. And now we are 54.9. And so what was wild is because I set that expectation at the beginning, it wasn't a surprise later. But what I did is I said, all right, franchisees, we normally don't allow people to buy more than X number of territories based upon their specific situation. However, within the next week and a half, we're going to be refiling our franchise disclosure document. And the cost is going up. And as a sign of good faith, we want to allow anyone who's interested, as long as they're agreeing to the development schedule of expansions and trucks per territory, to buy, one more territory. And in 5 days, we had 28 expansion territories purchased by existing franchisees. And we don't even have one franchisee that's been operating for a year yet. So that wasn't necessarily the strategy to do that. We were surprised by the amount of people that wanted to buy more. But yeah, I mean, I fit that into the model, and I knew that my franchise fees would be able to support the infrastructure that I was building. So that goes back to like understanding what your business is going to look like in 5 years. And I personally wouldn't ever start a business without getting a roadmap. So I'd build that out and then figure out what you need.
You know, Aaron, I actively acquire companies. Fiserv Franchising has 7 brands now under our platform, and we're always looking. And when we look at a brand, I personally do call franchisees to find out. The question I always ask: if you could do it over again, would you buy again? And if I don't have people telling me yes, there's a problem.
Right.
Well, you just tell me 28 people say they buy again because they bought other territories. That's a validation that's really important. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I got two other questions for you, and then if anyone else has questions, feel free to load into the chat. I ask every single person I've ever hired in this company. I do the last interview of every single person in our organization. I love doing it. Love getting to know people. But the question I always ask people is, what is the most influential book you have read?
So Traction's more tactical, but The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
That's a great
read
read.
this.
Oh yeah,
I love this book.
yeah. Ben Horowitz is he's got some great content in there. Yeah.
Incredible book. I'm actually now that my time's freed up a little bit more, I think I'm going to read it again. But from like a tactical, like running a business standpoint, it's Traction.
Yeah.
But like, I think when you start a business, like Traction's like, if you've ever read the book, like it's very like, okay, now you do this. This is like the steps.
Very tactical, step by step. Name, he literally had brands every step in the step.
Yes.
So you can remember it. Yeah, it's very, very effective.
So when the first time that I read that, I loved the framework and the idea of it, but I actually couldn't like put anything into practice because I hadn't acquired I hadn't acquired the business yet. Mm-hmm. So I had to read it multiple times to then implement it. The Hard Thing About Hard Things says basically within there that there's no training to be a CEO of a company. The only way you can be the CEO to learn how to be the CEO of a company is just to do it. And so there's nothing like you're basically operating within like just intuition. And that book made me like go into being the CEO of a company and be like, all right, like, it's okay to like be lonely and not know what to do. And so it's a little bit more theoretical, but still gives you some real like good business practices to think through as you become the founder of a startup, which anyone who's considering being a franchisor that has a good home service business, you are very much now the founder of a startup because the franchisor that you're creating is a completely different business than whatever the business is that you're good at.
Yeah.
And you're going to struggle. And as a result of struggling, your existing business will likely struggle unless there's complete infrastructure in place and you could step out and the business doesn't need you. And that's going to be really hard. And so, books like that, or, doing things like listening in on what we're talking about here will help aid in that challenge.
And I would just say that one of the things I liked about Ben Horowitz's book there is he talks about how there's a peacetime CEO, there's a wartime CEO.
Yeah.
The reality is that as a CEO, you're a founder of a business. The skills you have to start a business won't be the same skills you need to lead a business that's got 50 employees,
right?
300, 400 franchisees. So for me, one of the biggest takeaways was you have to have a thirst for learning. You have to want to learn, because who you are today isn't the person you would hire to run your business 10 years from now. So right. What are you going to do to up-level yourself to be that person that can run a company in both peacetime, wartime, or beginning of a business? So I love that book. I'm glad you shared it. Thank you. So I don't read it again. It was like 5 or 6 years ago I read it last. So
yeah,
nice reminder. Another thing, and then we're going to end, is we ask our kids sometimes, how did you fail today over the dinner table? I think failure and being open to failure is very important. I'd love for you, Aaron, to tell us, maybe not today, but what is one of your biggest failures you learned from?
So I hung on. So I had never let anyone go before. And because I had never managed, like the most management I had done in my previous role was like one franchise development representative underneath me. There's like franchisee management, but that's different. That's more relationship based. But like I had never like employed 28 people before. Like that was a new thing for me. And the first person that I hired, it became evident to me that he was in over his head. And instead of like making the decision to let him go, I held on a lot longer. And it was the right thing for the business, I think, but it was one of those situations where it was like a 51-49 decision on what to do. And he was the first person I had hired, and he was operations and I was sales, and we were just both working till like 1 a.m. every night. And then I watched this video that the CEO of LinkedIn did. I don't know if you've seen that expert. He was on like excerpt. He was on like 60 Minutes or something like that, and he basically was like, this was that thing that helped push it over the edge. Just like, when someone's in the wrong seat, the most compassionate thing you can do for a leader is remove them from that seat so they can go find a seat that's better for them.
Totally. It's also it's attractionism, if you want to call it that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I did that and recognized that by and the other thing that someone told me is like, your duty is to the business. How you feel about the decisions you have to make to grow the business is less important than your duty to the business, basically. And so, now it made that decision. This was early on, business went to where it needed to go. And now when and if that decision comes up, or when and if I've recognized this needs to happen, we're going to do it and we're going to move on. And so learning that it was a failure, but it allowed me to learn and grow as a leader. And to your point about like being a CEO, like starting a business, being the founder of a business is the biggest professional development course that you can take. Like every single time the business grows, like I'm stepping out of sales and now I'm going into like doing this much kind of bigger, like overseeing role. And I'm out of my element, but every day I continue to get better at the thing. And then I'm going to need a new thing, and I'm going to do this. And so being able to be nimble like that is something that I think every leader needs to learn how to do, or be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Love it. Good reminder. Uncomfortable being uncomfortable. Be good at that. Great book if you like to read is I just was reading it, called The Comfort Crisis. And it's how we all just love our temperature just right and our food just right and everything just right. And being comfortable with being uncomfortable is a great reminder and great advice to us all. So thank you, Aaron. Thanks for joining us, and thank you to all of our listeners who have participated. I'll see you guys next month.
See ya. Thanks.
Hey everyone, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and more importantly, that it brings some value in building your home services business. If you'd like to access more of this amazing content, like and subscribe below. If you'd like to be part of our live recordings and get involved with the speakers and myself, click the subscribe to calendar button or the link in the description to get updates to future events.